All right. Well, hello and good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock on Thursday, October 22nd, 2020. I'm Sarah Mason. I'm the Division Manager for Recycling with the City of Houston Solid Waste Management Department, and I will be the moderator and facilitator of this informational meeting to present the draft of our long-range solid waste management plan and to hear comments and questions from you all. This is a virtual meeting using Microsoft Teams, and it is being recorded and will be shared afterward on our Solid Waste Department YouTube channel and also the project webpage. I'd like to thank you all so much for participating in our discussion today and remind you that this is a virtual meeting, and so we ask that you please keep your phone or computer muted during the meeting unless or until your name is called to provide comments. Okay, next slide, please. All right. The meeting agenda is on the slide before you. We will have an overview presentation of the solid waste management plan, which will be around 30 minutes and includes the background work completed, goals established, and recommended future actions. After the presentation concludes, we will take up to 15 minutes to address any written questions that have been submitted in the chat log during the presentation. If you would like to submit a question on your computer, you can do so in the chat box. Please type the word question before your entry. We will be monitoring the chat log during the meeting and will address written questions that come in during the presentation at the end of the presentation for 15 minutes before moving to the speaker list. If you're not on your computer, we will also pause to ask for questions at the end of the presentation, and you can briefly unmute yourself and let us know if you have a question to ask. After we do the questions and answers, we will begin calling for speakers to share their comments with the group. Speakers will be called in the order that the requests to speak were received. If you did not sign up in advance to speak, you may do so during the meeting by submitting your name and the phrase request to speak in the chat box. Please remember to put your first and last name. If you're on the phone and not in front of a computer, we will call for speakers as well at the end of the presentation. At that time, please briefly unmute yourself and announce your name and that you would like to be added to the list of speakers. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to share their comments and/or questions, and the project team will respond to those comments at that time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to a productive discussion. We will now begin our overview presentation. To start out with, we'd like to cover why does Houston need a solid waste plan? Why is it an important project? The city is responsible for the management of the waste generated within Houston, either through direct collections as we provide to residential units, or through policy and partnerships with private haulers and community stakeholders for material coming from the commercial sector. As Houston has grown and the available solid waste infrastructure has been used and consumed, we need to focus on how those needs will be met in the future. The goals of the solid waste management plan are to provide long-term solutions for the city's solid waste management needs. It is a 20-year plan. It looks out until 2040. It's a comprehensive and integrated plan that considers and addresses all components of an integrated solid waste management system. The plan discusses how to improve service and right-size the solid waste management department and how to assure financial sustainability over the long term. It is the basis for a zero waste management plan and covers how to best implement solid waste priorities of waste reduction, recycling, material recovery, and finally disposal. The plan also identifies what solid waste infrastructure will be needed to meet the city's long-term needs into the future. And this plan will have an impact on all sectors of the Houston community, including residential, apartments, businesses, and institutions. Next slide, please. The project scope was written to lead to smart solutions, solutions that are action-oriented and where the results can be measured. The city tasked the project team with taking a very detailed look at the status of Houston's solid waste and materials management ecosystem. This includes existing facilities, their status, and what will be needed in the future. The team also looked at our current waste generation sources, both at how much is generated and also where the material comes from, and then use that data to project the amount of waste we can anticipate in the future. They looked at current diversion programs and policies and compared those to adopted best practices in other communities. Finally, they have evaluated our current services and ways of doing business and made recommendations on how to improve Houston's environment, as well as the financial viability of the program. The draft plan contains a number of recommendations related to reducing waste, improving service, improving our local environment, and meeting future solid waste management needs, and improving the fiscal situation of the department. However, it will not be a final plan until we hear from you and others in the city of Houston and have a chance to incorporate that feedback into the plan. Next slide. All of the research and analysis I mentioned resulted in several background documents to support the formation of goals and objectives of the long-range plan. Those background documents, including the facilities analysis and report that looks at the physical solid waste infrastructure, the waste generation forecast and diversion report, which looks at how much trash and recycling we have now and predicts what we will have in the future, the analysis of our current programs and industry best practices, the funding assessment, and finally, the draft plan document can all be found on the project website. If you visit our main department website at houstonsolidwaste.org, at the top of the page, you'll see an announcement regarding the updated draft of the long-range plan. If you follow that link, you can reach the project website and go to the Documents tab to find a PDF version of all of the documents I mentioned. The draft plan is divided into sections as well, so you can download the entire document or you can download, say, just the executive summary or just the action plan and recommendations. Next slide. Once the background research was completed, we began convening the advisory task force appointed by Mayor Turner to assist solid waste management in completing this project. The task force included representatives from the solid waste industry, including landfill operators, recyclers, composters, solid waste haulers, and representatives from the Houston community, the nonprofit sector, and academia. In total, there were 22 people appointed, and we had 7 meetings over the last year and a half. At each meeting, the task force was presented information on the different analysis completed by the consulting team and asked to give feedback and guidance on the creation of a sustainable materials management strategy for Houston for the next 20 years. This group has given a lot of their time and their talent, and we are very appreciative of their help and their sharing of their experience and expertise. The task force helped to establish the goals and objectives of the plan, reviewed all of the technical assessments and reports, recommended priorities, provided input on the direction of the plan, and have been helping us get out the word around the draft plan now that it's been posted. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the plan timeline and a little discussion about where we are now. As I mentioned, our approach has been to identify Houston's needs and resources first, then identify a range of options available to the city, and then develop a Houston-specific strategy from those options for meeting our current and future solid waste needs. The project team conducted a series of one-on-one interviews with people in the industry, city staff, and leadership, and compiled data on all the pieces of our materials management ecosystem. Then, with the help and the guidance of the Mayor's Advisory Task Force, goals, objectives, and recommendations were drafted to provide Houston with a sustainable materials management program for the next 20 years. At this time, we are polishing the draft with feedback and comments from our residents. This phase of the project is to gain public input through these information meetings and by requesting written comments on our website. In addition to these information meetings and the website, we're also asking Houston residents to respond to our survey that is linked on the web. The survey is designed to gain your feedback not just on the plan, but on the performance of our department and providing service and your recommendations for improving those services. I hope that you will take a few minutes to check out the survey after today's meeting and complete it if you've not already done so. The survey will be open until October 31st, It takes about 10 minutes to complete. We've gotten around 720 responses so far. We'd love to get many more than that, so please do take the time and fill that out if you'd like, and let your friends and neighbors know as well. At this time, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Mike Carlton, who's our project manager on the consulting team, to walk you through the details of their findings and of the plan. Mike is with AZ&B Engineering, and he has many years of experience helping cities craft long-range plans such as this one and meet other solid waste needs. So, Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. First, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Harry Hayes, your director, for letting us be part of this important project. I also want to thank the members of the Mayor's Advisory Task Force. I noticed that Lori Hinchcliffe had signed on for this meeting, and I want to thank her for her participation, as well as any other task force members that may be on the meeting here. The input that they provided us was very significant in giving us a better handle on local needs and what their concerns are for the long-term solid waste management plan. Next. Project background. Houston is unique as it relates to solid waste management. The city solid waste management department provides service to nearly 400,000 households. Services provided include garbage, recycling, yard waste, junk tree waste collection. The solid waste department also provides services for the collection of materials at drop-off centers and the environmental centers where residents can take household hazardous waste. One of the interesting things that I learned about Houston when we started this plan is the vast area that the city covers. It covers 640 square miles, and several large cities could fit within its boundaries. These two facts alone have a significant bearing on the city's equipment needs. Unlike most cities throughout the country, Houston pays for its program through the general fund. Most other cities have an enterprise fund, which is paid for by a monthly service fee that is charged to residents. This allows those cities to operate their solid waste program more like a business. During my presentation, we'll discuss issues such as collection needs, facilities such as transfer stations and landfills, and other solid waste management needs. The city's program relies on a mix of both public and private sector facilities to meet its needs on a regional basis. And finally, more than 2/3 of the waste stream comes from businesses and institutions. Unlike the plan that was done in the past for the city, this plan looks at ways to address the needs of not just the residents, but also the businesses and institutions, because they have to be part of the solution for the problems that the city is facing right now. Next. So what are some of the challenges that Houston is facing as it relates to solid waste management? Funding is the biggest challenge. As I mentioned, in comparison to other cities, Houston relies on the general fund. The amount that Houston spends per household is significantly less to provide the same level of service. Because the funding source is from the general fund, solid waste must compete with other city priorities funded through this source. That includes police and fire. It was part of the recommendation in a 1990 solid waste plan that the city move away from the general fund to an enterprise funding source. Secondly, the city's increase in multifamily housing also creates unique problems for the city's collection program. New approaches to dealing with these situations will need to be explored and implemented. The commercial sector accounts for a majority of the waste that's generated. 3.5 million tons is generated by businesses and institutions compared to 700,000 tons being generated by the residential sector. If the city is going to achieve large-scale waste reductions, the institutional, commercial sector, and multifamily sectors need to be a part of that solution. Fourth, storm events such as Hurricane Harvey and other events have increased over the years, and each year the city has to deal with major wind and flooding events. These events create large quantities of waste that need to be managed in a short period of time. And finally, disposal capacity in the region is approximately 30 to 35 years, and this is region-wide. As local landfills reach capacity, the city will have to haul waste longer distances. To assure capacity is available over the long term, the city needs to be planning for a facility now. It takes approximately 10 to 15 years to secure this new capacity. Houston currently relies 100% on the privates for disposal. Next. As Sarah mentioned, we did a fairly thorough analysis of both what the amounts of waste that are generated as well as facilities available to manage that waste stream. The first step in that process was to look at waste generation. Houston residents, businesses, and institutions generate approximately 4.3 million tons per year. If there's no major changes in the way that waste is created or how it's processed, we would expect that will increase to 5.4 million tons by the year 2040, largely due to an increase in population in the city. As I mentioned, residents are responsible for only a small percentage of that, and it's essential that all sectors participate in the programs that we're recommending to reduce the amount of waste that's being generated to assure long-term disposal capacity. There are some encouraging signs, though. We looked at the recycling sector in Houston and what was being recycled versus disposed. We estimated approximately 2 million tons are currently being recycled. Much of this is construction and demolition waste, but there are efforts by several businesses in Houston to make significant reductions in waste generation. Several large businesses now have sustainability goals that include reducing the amount of waste that they're generating, but also looking at the way that they're producing products to make them more efficient, less wasteful, and easier to recycle. We're optimistic that those changes will impact current trends in waste management, but to be safe, we plan for a worst case scenario so that facilities are available when the city needs them. Next. The second step that we took was to look at the city's solid waste infrastructure. When people think about solid waste management facilities, they generally immediately think of a landfill. In fact, the region relies on a wide range of facilities for managing waste. These include material recovery facilities, which process the recyclable materials you place in your recycling cart, scrap material dealers, which buy recyclable paper, plastics, metals, and other recyclables, drop-off centers and recycling centers where people can bring trash and recyclables. These are operated by the city. These facilities, the city-operated drop-off centers, often provide the best opportunities for residents of multifamily units to participate in the recycling program. Excuse me. There are mulch and composting facilities that process yard waste, brush, tree waste, and in some cases, sludge and food waste. Transfer stations where waste is taken from collection vehicles and put into larger transfer vehicles. This is a more economical way to transfer waste, especially in places with significant traffic congestion problems. And finally, landfills. These are engineered facilities with liners, covers, and regulated operating and closure standards. As part of this planning process, we did a thorough evaluation of all these facilities, and that report's on the city's solid waste website. Next. One of the critical issues that we looked at was disposal capacity in in the Houston area. Increases in waste reduction efforts and recycling will mitigate the need for capacity, but in the short to midterm, the city is going to continue to rely on landfills for proper waste disposal. There's no silver bullet currently available to eliminate landfills at this time. The city relies on every one of the landfills in the Houston-Galveston region. These landfills have an estimated capacity of approximately 30 to 35 years, assuming waste generation continues on its current path. For new capacity, either the city or a private firm has to identify an acceptable site, secure a permit from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and that process may include a public hearing, and then construct the facility. That process takes between 10 and 15 years to get through. Next. We developed, working with the Mayor's Advisory Task Force, goals and objectives for the plan. We presented the Mayor's Advisory Task Force with a lot of background information and options for dealing with the issues facing the city. Before we did that, though, we asked them to assist in developing these goals and objectives. They identified 5 major categories of goals, and the project team evaluated the data, evaluated options that are available, and looked at what other cities are doing to manage waste. From that information, we presented a range of options to the task force and had them involved in prioritizing specific recommendations. The following slides go through the 5 categories and identify some of the key issues and specific recommendations. In working with the task force, it became very apparent that this was very personal to them, and we understand that it's personal to everyone in Houston in terms of the service that's being provided, what people's expectations are, and what a quality level of service means to everybody. So their input was very helpful in developing these goals and objectives. As I mentioned, they identified 5 key areas. Sustainable materials management means reducing waste through public education and incentives for better product stewardship, recycling and composting, quality and timely service to Houston residents, and to engage the commercial sector in future years. The infrastructure management is to make sure that there are necessary facilities to meet the city's long-term needs. The program should be financially sustainable. The program should have the fiscal resources to pay for the quality of service that residents expect from the department. The program should also recognize the needs of low-income individuals. The task force talked a lot about how does the city make this program not just fiscally responsible, but meet the needs of low-income individuals as it implements its recommendations. And finally, a beautiful city which focuses on reducing illegal dumping, cleaning up existing sites, as well as cleanup of homeless encampments, and increased litter control. Next. Sustainable materials management. As Sarah mentioned, this is a plan to get Houston to be a zero waste community, looking to reduce and recycle as much as possible, following that hierarchy that she mentioned earlier. Next. We looked at some of the key issues related to source reduction and recycling, and at this point I'd like to have Allison Trueluck, who handled a lot of those issues, to talk about some of the major issues that cities are facing regarding recycling. Allison?
Sure, Mike. The 2 main issues facing pretty much every city's recycling programs are markets and contamination. And by markets, we mean when you put your recyclables in the recycling container and the city collects it and then takes it to the processor, and then the processor sorts out the materials and bales it up, and then sells those bales to recycling markets, where those materials can be recycled into new products. So that's what we mean by markets. Recycling markets prices have always been very volatile, but for the last couple of years, the prices have been very depressed, which decreases the revenue that can be generated from recycling programs. The other major issue is contamination, something that, again, most cities are facing. And contamination would be anything that doesn't belong in the recycling container. So if it's not part of the recycling program itself, it's contamination. And the issue with contamination is that once the processor has sorted out the contamination, that material then has to be hauled out to the landfill or otherwise disposed. So it hinders efficiency and it costs more money to be handling that material twice. So the markets affect the ability to generate revenue, and the contamination increases costs for recycling programs. Mike?
Thanks, Allison. Next, please. As Sarah mentioned, we are conducting a survey of residents to look at their thoughts on the solid waste management plan, and also to get some feedback as to what they're doing and what recommendations they've got for the city as it relates to the solid waste plan. I think she mentioned we have over 700 responses at this point. Some of the initial findings are that 86% of the respondents place their carts out for recycling. 90% say that they're confident or somewhat confident that they are doing it correctly. And this is in spite of the fact that the city's contamination rate right now is running at about a 35% level, and is one of the focuses for the recycling program is to reduce that level. 67% say their green carts are over 80% full on collection day. 27% use food waste for backyard composting, which is encouraging. 68% of apartment residents do not have recycling available at their facility, and 60% say their workplace does not have a recycling program. So what we want to do is encourage more recycling, especially on the apartments and commercial, as part of that the plan's efforts to reduce waste. Next. So the recommendations that were suggested for the plan, that are in the plan right now, as it relates to sustainable materials management, include adopt the climate action plan recommendations for residential reductions of 50% of residential material by 2040, enhance public information education programs, enact measures to significantly reduce contamination in the residential recycling program, enhance multi-family recycling efforts, initially through public information program and then mandatory programs. Next. And then enhance private sector source reduction and recycling efforts, again, initially through public information, stakeholder involvement programs, and then ultimately looking at mandatory efforts targeted at this sector. Encourage greater food waste management through reduction, food donations, and composting. Divert sludge to composting facilities, and improve data gathering and program evaluation within the department as a way to monitor the success of the plan's implementation, and to get a better handle on what future facility needs will be. Next. Next, I want to talk about the quality of service goals that were established. And this is basically to improve service, quality, and efficiency. Next. As I mentioned, it's pretty incredible what Harry Hayes and his team, including Sarah, are able to accomplish given the resources that are available to them. They provide a full range of solid waste management services on a shoestring budget. The department's involved in a number of efforts to enhance the local environment through recycling and other programs. Some of the services that the city currently provides include garbage and recycling services, monthly bulk waste collection, weekly yard waste collection, comprehensive environmental programming, including the management of a household hazardous waste program and drop-off sites, the reuse warehouse and neighborhood depositories, great waste disposal and recycling processing contracts and services, and a highly successful disaster debris management program. We certainly have had an opportunity to build on that experience over the last couple of years as storms continue to hit and generating a lot of disaster debris. Next. The city survey does give us a mixed response in terms of level of satisfaction with the city's service. The city knows that it has a lot to do to improve the services that they're currently providing. But we also got a lot of the city also got a lot of compliments in terms of the level of service that they're getting and the facilities that they're currently managing. We did ask residents, how full is your cart at the time of collection? And approximately 55% said that their cart was over 60% full. Large number of residents said that it was either 80% or 100% full. One of the goals of the plan is to kind of flip this graph around so that more residents are seeing their cart less full every week during collection. Next. The recommendations that are in the plan as it relates to quality of service include right-sizing operations by expanding the fleet and staffing to meet citizen commitments. This also includes establishing a route allocation that allows the city to complete its routes in approximately 8 hours. Modernize the solid waste fleet. Currently, about half of the fleet is over 7 years old, and those trucks are less reliable, less efficient, and require a lot more maintenance. The city is making progress in updating that fleet, but needs to continue to do so. Expand the number of drop-off facilities and household hazardous waste collection services so there's better geographic coverage throughout the city, and provide efficient, safe, and responsive services during heavy storm and other disaster events. Next. Next area that we looked at was infrastructure materials management. And this is to ensure long-term capacity and sustainable solid waste infrastructure. In 2019, the city took a big step in meeting this goal with the construction of the FCC Material Recovery Facility. That facility is owned by the city to process recyclable materials from the city's residential collection program, as well as it processes commercial waste as well. That facility has been recognized nationally as one of the best facilities in operation. In coming years, the city will need to improve its existing transfer stations, add more drop-off centers, and evaluate ways to make sure that there are places to dispose of waste. Next. The Houston region has 12 municipal solid waste landfills and 15 construction and demolition landfills. The capacity's been decreasing on an annual basis. We've talked about aggressive ways to reduce waste and increase the amount of material recycled. However, even with big changes in waste management practices, the city will continue to need to rely on landfill capacity for the foreseeable future. Houston's transfer stations, the city has 3 of them, and they're about 20 years old. I know that Dave Yonke, who's with us, recently did a study, or a couple of years ago, did a study on these facilities. And Dave, you'd like to make some comments on those sites?
Sure. Yeah, these are some facilities that do need some capital repairs and improvements. 8 years ago, we identified about $8 million worth of improvements that are required to allow them to operate efficiently, and those costs have only gone up with inflation. Mike.
Yep, thanks, Dave. And it wasn't just a couple of years, it was 8 years ago, and a number of those recommendations are still outstanding. So the city needs to be able to fund those improvements. Next. As part of the survey, we asked citizens about the city's role in planning future disposal capacity. An overwhelming number of residents either strongly agreed or agreed with the fact that the city needs to be involved. Approximately 76% of the respondents responded to that question again as either agree or strongly agree. And that will be one of our recommendations in the plan, is to have the city move forward with planning a future landfill. Next. Recommendations that we have for infrastructure for material management include constructing a new transfer station in the northeast part of Houston, invest in the existing facilities. As Dave mentioned, there are a number of outstanding improvements needed at those three facilities. Site and permit a new city-owned landfill. The facility, again, will take about 10 to 15 years to go through the process of site selection through final development. The city may operate that with city crews, or it may operate them the same way that it does its transfer stations, which means that the city will build and own the facility, but rely on the private sector to operate them. Again, same way that they do the transfer stations. The cities of Fort Worth and Arlington manage their landfills in that fashion. The city of Dallas owns and operates their landfill. So it's depending on how the city views that. The next recommendation is to evaluate closed facilities for brownfield development. This is a multi-year process, and the challenges are pretty significant, but it can lead to some quality use of land area that was previously not very useful. Evaluate rail haul as a long-term option for the city. Siting facilities in urban areas is becoming extremely difficult. Major cities across the country are now looking at rail haul as a necessary way of economically transporting waste to facilities outside the urban core. And finally, track and evaluate resource recovery technologies for meeting the city's future waste management needs when they're technically, economically, and environmentally feasible. And there are some exciting things happening, not just in the country, but locally to Houston in terms of new technologies coming online for material recovery. Next. The fourth area that we looked at was assuring financial sustainability of the program. Houston needs a more sustainable funding source to be competitive with other cities and provide the quality services to residents while expanding efforts towards sustainable materials management. The program is extremely underfunded and relies again on the general fund to meet its needs. This reduces the possibility that in rough budgetary times, the program is still able to adequately provide the equipment necessary and maintain the staffing levels that result in quality, efficient, and economical service. And finally, as I talked earlier, the task force did spend a lot of time making sure that we recognize that the program be equitable in terms of any kind of fees that will be necessary. Next. One of the things that we did as part of the planning process was to compare Houston to some of the other cities. And we compared Houston to San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin. Houston currently provides services to, as I mentioned, about 390,000 households, which is the most of any of those cities that I mentioned, the closest being San Antonio at 356,000. We then compared the number of employees maintained by those various cities for solid waste management. And on a household served basis per employee, Houston served approximately 893 households per employee, which is significantly above these other cities. San Antonio was at 570, Dallas at 466, and Austin at 434. We left out Fort Worth because they rely on a private contractor for providing collection services. So you can see that Houston is serves almost twice as many households per employee as these other cities. And on a budget basis per household, Houston was at $235 per household, San Antonio $365, Dallas $464, Fort Worth $308, and Austin at $494. So you can see that Houston again is about half of what these other cities are spending. Some may view that as Houston being extremely efficient in the way that they process or manage their program, but there is a point where that efficiency affects the level of service that is being provided, the level of sustainable management programs that are in place. Austin, again, is at the highest in terms of the number of the dollars per household, but they also have the highest recovery rate of any of these cities that we mentioned. So again, Houston's, both in terms of staffing and budgeting, is significantly less than some of these other cities. Next. We looked at solid waste fees that are being charged by these other cities that have enterprise funds. And the fees range from about $15 to $50 per household. Again, the fee is dependent on both the level of service, the recycling and reduction efforts. The fees include a monthly service fee, which is charged to residents that receive city services, and then a monthly environmental fee. And this environmental fee is charged not just to residents, but to businesses and owners of multifamily units. The fees that are generated from this typically pay for things that serve the entire community, such as illegal dump cleanups, public information programs, and disaster debris management type efforts. So that's why that fee is separate and charged to all sectors of the city. Next. So what would a sustainable funding program provide? Some of the immediate results that we would see would be a right sizing of the collection operations with necessary collection equipment and staffing, increase the number of additional depositories. Currently, the city's got 6. They need 5 more to meet the coverage needs of the city's expansive footprint. Increase the number of inspectors needed to address illegal dumping enforcement and do it in a more sustainable way. With proper service resources, customer service levels would be greatly enhanced. It would allow the city to provide a first-class program for waste reduction and recycling efforts. Next. We did ask residents as part of the survey whether they support a fee, and we asked it under a couple of different scenarios. One was, would you support a fee for the expansion and improvement of services? And approximately 43% of the respondents indicated that they agreed with that or strongly agreed with it. 18% were neutral, and about 39% opposed any kind of a fee. We also asked it, if the fee ensured that the system is properly sized and allows for growth. And again, we saw approximately 32% agree with that position. Much more percentage stating that they're neutral on that aspect of it, and approximately 40% opposed to a fee under those conditions. So there is kind of a mixed response to the fee. But I think as people understand what that will provide, I think that those numbers may change in the future. Next. So the goals or the specific recommendations for the financial sustainability program are to establish funding mechanisms that provide long-term financial sustainability for solid waste management needs. These funding mechanisms would include a monthly service fee and an environmental fee for all sectors, and for the city to secure grants, secure alternative funding sources such as grants and partnerships, provide services utilizing best management practices, evaluate opportunities to provide financial assistance to low-income homeowners similar to the water program. The city's water department does have a program to support low-income individuals with their water bills. We would match something similar to that. Evaluate opportunities for public-private partnerships. Next. The last area that we looked at was a clean and beautiful city, and this is focused on addressing illegal dumping and litter. This is an area that the advisory task force felt was extremely important and prioritized a lot of those programs very high. Next. Some of the major issues that are confronting the city as it relates to a clean and beautiful city are the increasing number of illegal dump sites, insufficient number of drop-off sites to cover Houston's vast geographic area. Disposal costs are increasing, making it there's more of an incentive for individuals to illegally dump. And then a lack of funding for both enforcement and cleanup of sites. We have a map that's on this slide that illustrates the various council districts. The dots, which are several, indicate the location of illegal dump sites throughout the city for, I think, about a 11-month or 1-year period. Next. We asked residents how they felt in terms of the solid waste department and litter control. 93% of the respondents felt it was important for the city to have a very active anti-litter program. We also asked about use of the city's drop-off sites, and 70% of the respondents said that they have used those facilities, and most of the respondents felt that those facilities were being managed in a very good way by the city. Next. So the recommendations related to clean and beautiful city were to reduce litter throughout the city, presenting a more beautiful and healthier Houston, enhance efforts to reduce illegal dumping throughout the city, increase the number of drop-off centers and expand the hours of operations of those sites, making them more convenient, a more aggressive enforcement of illegal dumping laws, improve communication among enforcement officials, and continue to clean up homeless encampments. Next. Those are the major categories that the task force went through and what their recommendations are for the solid waste plan. And again, appreciate the effort and input that we received from each one of them. So what's the road ahead in terms of some of the short-term things that need to be accomplished related to the solid waste management plan? First, make the program financially sustainability so that it has the resources to implement all the recommendations that are in the plan. Right-size service operations, establish best practice fleet replacement schedules, and enhance customer engagement and education. Initiate future waste disposal outlets now. This means identifying a future landfill for the city. Start that process because it is a long-term process. Deal with the multifamily and commercial waste management needs. And then finally require all of this is going to require city council action for the plan to actually um, resolve the problems that are facing the city. Excuse me. The next steps in the plan are to get the public input, and this is part of that process. As Sarah mentioned, we encourage every one of you to complete the city's survey. We'll have an address where you can get that information and provide those comments. We'll evaluate those comments and make whatever adjustments in the draft plan we need to. We'll take it back to the advisory task force one more time to get their thoughts, and then present it to the city council. Then it's up to the council to fund and implement the projects and programs that we've identified. We definitely want to hear from everyone in terms of your thoughts on the plan and the recommendations, and either do that during today's meeting or contact the department. Next slide, please. And this is where you can contact us. The Houston Solid Waste website is houstonsolidwaste.org. Written comments can be provided to longrange@houstontx.gov. Thank you for your time and patience, and I know we covered a lot of areas, but at this point, we'd love to hear from you. Sarah?
Okay, thank you so much, Mike. We've had a lot of people join us since we got started. I want to apologize. Apparently, the link we had on our website and that we had in our email for today's meeting was broken or not working for everyone. It worked for all of us to get on, but I heard from several attendees via email that they were not able to join by that link. We have put the updated link in our Facebook chat. It's also in the chat on the meeting if you want to copy and send that to anyone. But I think that's why we do have a lot of folks on the phone today who are not able to join via Teams. So I do want to apologize for that. And also, as we have had a lot of people join, just a reminder that this is a virtual public meeting and we are recording the meeting so that we can post it onto our department YouTube channel and also the project website at the conclusion of the meeting. And so if you have any questions from the presentation and you are in the Teams platform online and you're able to, please, you can drop those into the chat box and we'll be monitoring that as we go through this question and answer period. I am also going to give the opportunity for folks on the phone if they have a question, because we do have a lot of people on the phone. If you will, when I open that up here in a second, just because it's a virtual situation, it's a little bit harder to have some structure. So we'll just try to call on people as they're able to unmute themselves. And if you will, give your first and last name and let us know whether or not you want to put your name on the list to share comments and speak, or if you have a question, and we'll kind of take it from there. Just some reminders for that. If you're on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself, and then *6 again to mute yourself. And if you're on the computer, if you see the microphone with the line / through it, that means you're muted. And when you're called on, again, if you will just unmute yourself, give us your first and last name, let us know if you have a question or a comment. Right now on our agenda, what we have been doing in these meetings is taking about 15 minutes to answer questions before we move on to comments. So at this time, I'll see if we have any questions that have come in, but I will take a moment. For those attendees who are on the phone, does anybody have a question that they would like to ask? Okay. Then did anyone want to sign up to share their comments? I can put your name down on our list to speak.
Sure. My name is Jan Naidu, and I'm from Annapurna Solutions.
Okay. Jan, if you will spell your last name for me, please.
Sure, it's N as in Nancy, A as in Alpha, I as in Indigo, D as in Delta, U as in Umbrella.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll put you on our list here. Do I have anyone else who would like to put their name on our list to share comments? Either on the phone or in the on the computer? Okay. All right, Jan, we'll come back to you in a second. We have one, this might also be your question because I see that it's from Annapurna Solutions in the chat log. We do have one question around, the question is, what type of mobility tools does the solid waste department use to help residents and crowdsource illegal dumping incidents in the community besides 311? So I will say that right now we don't have a lot of applications around that. Mike, do you know of communities that are using different tools for tracking illegal dumping outside of maybe their 311 or 311 type customer service system?
You know, only to the extent that I know that cities have got various mobile apps to help report that. Besides the 311 calling, but beyond that, nothing specifically.
Maybe I can talk just a little bit about that. This is Risa.
Okay.
There are several different ways that the city of Houston gathers information about illegal dumping, and the intent is for all of those mechanisms to coordinate through the Department of Neighborhoods Inspection and Public Services Division. So calls come directly into 311, the 311 system into the Department of Neighborhoods, or from the 311 system, they get reported to the Department of Neighborhoods. And then Harris County has a camera system, and then Houston Police Department has a camera system, and what they pick up get eventually coordinated back through the Department of Neighborhoods. One of the things that we recognized is that trying to streamline that whole process and get everybody a little bit better coordinated in terms of identifying illegal dumping a little bit more efficiently would help. In addition to that, and I don't know whether this has anything to do with your question or not, but we identified the need to try to make the depositories more depositories available during longer hours, and to have a much more robust public information program about the proper ways to dispose of waste, and particularly bulky material, to try to cut down on illegal dumping. But the coordination of reporting and the coordination of enforcement between the city, the police department, and the county are really the basis of the recommendations that were made in this plan.
Great.
I know that was a rambling response. I hope some of that responded to your question.
No, I appreciate
Yes,
that,
it does.
Risa. Thank you. And this reminds me, I'm sorry, I was focusing on the technical issue we had, and I forgot to introduce our project team. And so for everyone in the meeting and on the call, as we are taking these questions, you will be hearing answers from various members of our project team that have worked on this plan. You did hear the presentation from Mike Carlton. He is our project lead. You just heard Risa Weinberger with Risa Weinberger and Associates. She's got the expertise that she brought for this project specifically was around organics and composting, both at the commercial scale and also residential material. She's got many years of experience. We also work together with the State of Texas Alliance for Recycling, the state recycling organization. And Dave Yonke and Allison Trulock, both with NewGen Strategies. Dave's also had been involved with STAR with us, and he had really worked on the financial assessment, looking at the department's budget and what user fees or environmental fees other cities have, and benchmarking Houston against them. Allison really focused on our waste reduction, recycling, reuse components, more of the zero waste area, so I'll be calling on her for those questions. And then also on the call is Tammy Wallace with InFocus Strategies, which helped us with our public engagement and outreach piece. And then, you know, in-house in our department, our team, we have both Tyra Wilkins, our public information officer. She's going to be monitoring and responding to you all in the chat log, and Abel Fernandez with our creative services, who's been our PowerPoint driver. So I appreciate all their help as well. And we do have a few folks from our advisory task force on the call today, and I appreciate that too. So at this time, I'm going to keep moving through the questions, and then when we get done answering questions as they come in, as I mentioned, we'll take about 15 minutes to address those. Then we will move on to the speaker list. So if you do want to speak, put your name in the chat box, or just be ready, and I'll be calling for those again here shortly. We do have some other questions that have come in. Another question from one of the folks on our team, Keith Koski: is it possible to obtain information regarding customer satisfaction of individual drop-off centers? Yes, that is part of the survey that's online. We did ask residents to let us know if they've ever visited any of our drop-off facilities, including the West Park Consumer Recycling Center, our neighborhood depositories and recycling centers, the Environmental Service Center, or the Building Materials Reuse Warehouse. Let us know a little bit about their visit, how satisfied they were, how long it took them to get in and out, the status of the site when they were there. Is it maintained and clean, and how helpful our staff are. So we do have that feedback as part of the survey, and so we'll be able to share that once that gets concluded and we have all of the results. This is a reminder for those of you who joined in a little bit late. This is our 20-year long-range solid waste management plan. This is the first time the city has updated this plan in over 30 years. It's a holistic look at all of the waste and recycling that's generated within the Houston community. So that includes the residential sector, as well as multifamily and commercial and industrial sectors. So we are looking at the very big picture, and it gives recommendations on what the department can do to improve our services, but also what actions the city should consider taking in order to have a sustainable materials management for the next 20 years. As part of that, we have a survey online for Houston residents. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. I do believe that link works, so let me know if it doesn't. But I know the link on the website does, so take a second if you have some time, if you're a Houston resident, and complete that and let us know your thoughts on that feedback. We've gotten just over 700 responses, where we would love to get 1,000 or more. We have a lot of people that live here. Okay, we have a couple of other questions that have come in. A lot of these questions are around illegal dumping. So the next question we have is, how many city council members dedicate part of their discretionary funds to illegal dumping or other solid waste systems? And I don't know currently. I know, so for those on the call, I think what this question is related to each district council member has an allocation of what are called council district service funds that they can use for different projects within their district. And we have had a few council members work with the department since those budgets went into place to do specific either illegal dumping cleanups or like District I and District J use some of that money to do a like a shopping cart collection pilot program. We've done tire roundups, and I don't know the exact number of different districts we've worked with, but I think it's at least 4. There are 11 districts, and I think we've worked with at least 4, but it could be more than that. So we'll have to get back on the exact number there. I just answered that because I'm not sure that the project team would have information on those programs. So the next question we had is around is solid waste working with any other departments on stopping illegal dumping, which is causing flooding in different areas. I think Risa spoke to that a little bit. I'll go back to her. In addition to the organics and composting, she did also really delve into the illegal dumping recommendations of the plan. So I'll call on her again for that question.
Not formally, as far as I know. Maybe Sarah knows otherwise. But I will say, to the extent that other departments, say Public Works or, you know, anybody in flood control calls in an illegal dump site, either through the 311 system or to the Department of Neighborhoods or through any of the other channels that I described before, the solid waste department actually does not have I have to say this, I feel obligated to say this, the solid waste department does not have dedicated crews to clean up illegal dumping. They have crews every other, it's the crews that would otherwise do collection of heavy trash or tree collection. They only do those every other month. So those crews sort of in their spare time get out and clean up the illegal dump sites, whether they be in creeks or channels or you know, impeding flood control or not. I don't, that's again a long winding answer to say I don't know of a formal coordination program that is dedicated to the flooding issue in particular.
Okay, thanks, Risa. Yeah, I do know that the shopping cart project I had mentioned was started in part because within District J, this was under the previous council member's term, under former council member Laster, when for District J. I think his residents did see a lot of those shopping carts ending up in drainage ditches. And so that was one of the motivating factors for doing that pilot program. But I don't know otherwise. Of course, the department is tasked with collecting disaster debris after disaster, but I don't know on the mitigation side. I think you covered that well, Risa, so thank you. Okay, so I don't have any other questions right now in the chat log. I will call again to those who are on the phone. If you would like to ask a question at this time, just please unmute yourself and tell us your name and let us know what your question is.
Sarah, you might notice that Elise actually answered one of the questions here. I don't know whether you can see that response or not.
Yes, thank you. Yes. I appreciate that. Shout out to Elise Coffey, who is in the Solid Waste Management Department. She's our community outreach coordinator, and she's helping us out in the chat with some answers to some of these questions as well. So is there anyone who is on the phone who has any questions that you'd like to ask at this time?
Yes, Sarah,
Yes, go ahead.
Jessica Halsey.
Oh, hi, Jessica. How are you?
Busy. That's the reason why I haven't been able to participate lately. But right now I'm taking time. I have a newborn baby here, so I'm dedicating my time to the baby.
Oh,
But it's very important.
congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Jessica's on
Thank you.
our advisory task force, everyone. So go ahead.
But listening and this is a good response and good presentation. I am very hopeful that what I'm going to speak today will help. Number one, in reference to illegal dumping, the problem with the proliferation of illegal dumping sites, it's because we have businesses, the metal recycling places, where they're like magnets, and they attract all these shopping carts. Sometimes they bring too much, and they just dump it right in front. These places really, they create more problems for illegal dumping. Yes, we do have a big problem with that, especially in the East End Second Ward. And it has to do also with the lack of depositories that include taking like computers, what do you call that? Computers, television.
Mm-hmm.
Electronic waste. Yes.
Yes, there you go. Electronics. And when we put our bi-monthly heavy trash collection, we end up with televisions. We end up with, let me say this, also paint cans, because we do not have access to a nearby depository that takes electronics, paint cans, or other stuff. Only taking, like the one on Central, take the basics, just regular heavy trash and tree waste. Another problem that we have is with tires. They do not collect the tires.
Right.
And therefore, they remain. So we do have, I believe that we homeowners and rental property owners, we need to do more ourselves. We need to do more. I feel that I have a responsibility to comply, but we do need more information, ways to inform the communities. For me, in my case, here in the East End Second Ward, it's very important to provide that bilingual information, and to disperse that to every business, churches in the community. We need to utilize many different ways to provide the information, mainly through our schools and churches. It has to be bilingual. It has to be a constant, a firm reminding. And believe me, I maybe I'm gonna get some of my neighbors upset with me, but I do support a fee. Once it touched my pocket, it's gonna get my attention.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. Thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing
Yes,
your comments and for being on the call
yes,
and for your time
yes.
in our advisory task force. And you're absolutely right. You know, the city and our team recognize that we have a need for additional neighborhood depositories. We currently do have
Yes,
6. And the
yes.
recommendation in the plan is to have at least 11 so that we would have one in every council district. The size and spread of Houston geographically is one of our biggest challenges as a city. We have a large area to cover. But we do recognize that, and that is one of the recommendations. Also, you know, we recognize that we have our environmental service center, the permanent location in the south, and we do once a month collection in the north for those items like the paint or pesticides, insecticides. We also do take electronics at that location, but we recognize really a city this size could support a permanent facility in the north as well. And those are the types of expanded services that would be included with that more sustainable funding. So,
Sarah, may I say also that in the past, I remember that we did have access to all of that at our local, like Central, the one on Central Drive.
mhm,
We had access to take all of that. You know, maybe that will alleviate the problem with illegal dumping, because nearby they have to go to Post Oak
mhm,
depository. To me, it bothers me to see seniors have to drive all the way here from the Eastern, all the way to Post Oak, you
mhm,
know, to
Right.
take 3 or 4 gallons of paint. It's very dangerous.
mhm.
I do believe that we have a need, and hopefully in the near future, we will be able to have a more probably personal conversation, face to face. You know,
Sure.
I know I
Yes.
like this way too, but we need to connect personally. We need to connect because it's so more discussion that it needs to take place.
Mhm,
Um, the problem here in my area, I have a lot of rental, uh, and that's where the problem also starts with the rental properties, the rental apartments. Uh, I've seen a lot of dumping, you know, illegally, and it's been there for 3, 4, 5 years. All,
mhm.
you know, tenants who they move out, they dump everything on the other side of the fence. Uh, so there's nobody's looking in that area, only me. But I mean, me and other caring people, you know, advocates. So
Yeah.
the apartments are the ones who they need to clearly, strongly put in their rental contract about the collection, about the, you know, the do's and don'ts of trash, heavy or small. But just let me say that we have excellent collection of a regular trash. Every, you know, the weekly regular trash, it's good. It's good, not a problem at all. Solid Waste should be proud that they provide good service to that collection every Mondays, or yeah, mine is it's on first Monday of the month, regular trash. So they provide good service. And quickly, we need to upgrade the trash receptacles.
Mhm.
We still have the one that it was given to us under the administration of Mayor Brown.
So just a few years ago.
And so that's very important, because if Jessica talks to the neighbors and say, hey, you know, support this, support that,
Uh-huh.
they're going to bring up the status of
These.
the trash receptacles, that they're
Mhm.
missing lids. They need to improve. that they need to replace them with new ones. Or
Okay.
maybe recycle, paint them black, upgrade the lids and the wheels.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your
Very
comments and for joining us today. I've definitely made a note
Yes.
of those things to include. And yes, yeah, for containers, you can call 311. I know that we've had a little bit of a delay, but I think we're getting new containers in or have gotten them in recently. So we should be getting caught up on
Sarah,
that.
it takes 2 months. It takes 2 months
Mm.
to respond. I know. I have requested one for the first time since back then, and but I do understand that the situation, so I'm okay. I can wait, I'll wait because I do understand. But other people, I have to hear that uh the their concerns, and so hopefully we'll upgrade those containers because I do have several without the cover, and that's not healthy. That's not
Right.
healthy.
Right.
Thank you, Sarah. And
Thank you.
I look forward to participate, hopefully, in the near future. Hopefully, if
In
everything
person.
goes well. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you
Sarah.
for your
Thank
time.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Great
Um,
presentation. Great presentation. And some of
Thank you.
my members, they did participate. They just sent me a text telling me I did, Jessica. I did participate. Okay, good deal.
Well, thank you very
Very
much.
good.
Thank
We're
you.
glad to hear that. And yes, we also look forward to some post-COVID times when we can be together in person again for these
Again.
conversations and meetings.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for their time.
Thank
everyone.
you. Okay, so I see that we have some conversations going on in the chat box around the illegal dumping. Did we have anyone else who was on the phone who had a question? If not, I know that Jan had wanted to share his comments. Jan, are you getting your questions, I'm sorry, answered in the chat box? Did you still want to share your comments?
Yes, ma'am. Alice Kofi is responding to me. Thank you.
Okay, so did you want to share comments now or no?
Sure.
Okay,
So,
go ahead.
so we are based out of the University of Houston, the Innovation Center, and we have developed very unique mobile tools that could be used both by the neighborhood department and also by the solid waste department for illegal dumping and also fleet management of solid waste trucks. The question is, whom should or could we be working with within either solid waste or also neighborhoods departments?
Great. Yeah, and I see that I think Elise has dropped her email address into the chat. Excuse me, and also her phone number. So I think she'd be a good contact to start with. You can also, if you want, send a follow-up email to the longrange@houstonsolidwaste.org email address. So we are monitoring that inbox. So if you want to email us there too with your contact information, or you can email Elise. Either way will be good. And it sounds like it would be can set up kind of an informational meeting.
Will do. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. I did have one person who had sent an email in advance for today. I don't know if is Carol Mims Galloway on the line. I had received an email from her in advance to speak today. Carol Mims Galloway. Okay. All right, so I'll go back to those. If you're on Microsoft Teams, if you want, you can put your first and last name and request to speak in the chat box, or type any questions that you have there in the chat box and we'll respond to those. Did anybody else who's on the phone have any questions or comments that you want to share at this time? Oops. I'm trying to set the timer for when we have comments going. I think I may have missed one question here. We did have a question. How does the city get unique tech solutions adopted for illegal dumping? Jan, was that one of your questions? Or is that someone else asked that question?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
Oh, great. Okay. So I will say that, the city is always looking out for, solutions, ways to improve our efficiency and our productivity and to provide higher quality service. Sometimes, in this instance, we're talking about the university, we may, sometimes we pilot technologies, but for adoption, we often try to get grant dollars. If we're looking to implement something, we don't always necessarily have the budget to adopt new technologies. But typically the way we've done it in the past is we will pilot different things. And if it looks like something would be a good fit, then we would work forward on doing a procurement, going through the procurement process to adopt that if it was something we wanted to do formally, or if we wanted a solution similar to that, we would go through the procurement process to adopt it. But as I mentioned, we have also in the past been fortunate to receive some grant funding to help with some technologies. But the city has the Office of Innovation, which I think is out of the mayor's office, and they work with the ION Center and like the Smart City Solutions. And so we try to stay abreast of those things to see if there's ideas or companies that might be good at working with the city. So, and I think that, some of the recommendations in the plan around a couple of the goals involve the city being aware of emerging technologies or emerging trends within the industry that may not be economically practical for us to adopt at this time, but to just stay aware of that and know that it's something that could be an opportunity for the city in the future. So that, that's one way that we look at those technological solutions. I'll ask folks on the project team, did y'all have anything to add? It seems like the conversation or questions around technology innovation and illegal dumping, or just technology innovation within solid waste.
Sarah, I'll take a first shot at it, and that's one of the challenges that the department faces, is having the financial resources to be able to adopt improvements that would make them more efficient. A lot of their budget goes to just maintaining the vehicles that they've got and keeping them running, and not having the funds in order to make the improvements necessary to get the best efficiency out of those trucks. The focus over the last couple of years has been to upgrade the fleet so that it's not relying on a bunch of trucks that are over 7 years old, but it does need to have the funds to be able to make those kind of improvements so that they're adopting best management practices.
Great, thank you, Mike. I don't know, is there anything that you want to share or that touch on? I think we've answered the questions we have right now. We might have some more come in. But are there points about the plan or the recommendations that you want to highlight or talk about at this time?
I think a lot of the participants are interested in the illegal dumping aspects of it. And I know that Reese has spent a lot of time looking at the problems and some of the programs that the city has. We are recommending that a lot more drop-off sites become available, but the enforcement part is just as important. And what one of the recommendations is for the department to work a lot more closely with law enforcement to get a more coordinated response and kind of move that up the priority chain in terms of that aspect of it.
The primary goal, this is Risa Weinberger again, the primary goal there is to try to make a tighter connection between the violation and the consequences of the violation, to try to shorten the time and make the consequences more sure and not delayed and not bypassed for illegal dumping that's identified.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Thank you. That's bound to happen.
Sure.
Sorry. So I was saying that I know we have those recommendations in the Houston plan, and because this does seem to be a topic of interest for today's discussion, I wondered if anyone on the project team could share maybe some best practices that have been observed. Illegal dumping is not a problem that is unique to Houston. That's a problem that communities across the country deal with, and so I didn't know if you had any examples of like best practices or communities that have been really successful in addressing that problem. Is there something?
Well, Sarah, it's really interesting that, in fact, Houston is held up as an example of a best practice in illegal dumping in the sense of the camera system that Houston has. And that's the envy of many cities. But, you know, at this point, I think it's fair to say Houston could use more.
That's the mute off. Yeah, that's great. And that is true between Houston Police and Harris County. There is pretty extensive camera system. Again, I think it's one of those situations where that challenge of a lot of area to cover kind of becomes a difficult one. But they do have, and I do think that does work and does produce good results. So it's, and they've gotten, I think, really innovative in being able to use lower cost technology so that they can have more of it, which has been a good development. So I'll just ask again. I know that I keep checking in, but we do have, I see probably a dozen or so folks who are on the phone and not in the Microsoft Teams platform. So do any of you who have called into the line have any questions that you would like to ask, or if you would like to share any comments? I'll pause at this time. You can unmute yourself and let us know. Okay. Just want to make sure that I'm giving everyone an opportunity to speak up if you would like to. Again, if you're in Teams and you have a question, you can drop it in the chat box and we will address it. I would say that one of the other items that often is inquired about is sort of more aggressive recycling and reuse opportunities, reduction opportunities. So I may call on Allison again to just talk about, maybe in a little bit more detail. We gave a high-level overview of the recommendations under each one of the 5 goals of the plan, but give you a little bit more information on some of the recommendations and opportunities Houston has in that area.
Sure, Sarah. Let me start by, we did put a little bit of emphasis on making sure that the city is leading by example, meaning that, you know, the city itself within different departments or city offices would be implementing source reduction, reuse and recycling within the city itself to kind of, like I said, lead by example. So more specifically, some of the strategies that were recommended in the plan related to waste minimization. I think Sarah mentioned earlier, kind of revamping the public information. And part of that is, just expanding on the system as a whole and making sure we're getting the word out. But we also talk in the plan about adding information to that outreach to help consumers make choices in their purchases. So, the best thing to do, and we saw the waste management hierarchy, is to not generate the waste in the first place. So the way the city can kind of lend itself to encouraging that is by informing citizens within the city of different opportunities to reduce that waste in the first place. I think most of you are probably aware that the city does have a reuse warehouse that allows for building materials to be warehoused and then lets nonprofits use those materials. So another recommendation is the plan is to look for other ways to reach out to nonprofit and the private sector in promoting those kinds of reuse opportunities and potentially recycling opportunities as well. We've also got some recommended strategies in there focused on both multifamily and commercial that first would start with technical assistance programs. And the way that would work is that either the apartment complex for multifamily or a business on the commercial side would voluntarily reach out to the city. The city would have staff actually go visit the site and basically perform an audit to look at the logistics to be able to set up recycling or diversion programs, kind of look at what materials are commonly generated that could be diverted. And then the city staff would basically provide a report to that apartment complex or that business to share with them, logistically how they could get a recycling program set up, potentially give them contact information with the private sector if they needed the private sector to perform that work, and then have those entities that volunteered report back to the city once they've implemented the recycling and diversion programs, so that the city kind of has an ongoing story to tell about this voluntary approach to expanding recycling and diversion, and hopefully success stories among the multifamily and commercial sectors. So we talk about that in more of a short-term to mid-term range in the plan, and in the long term, it could eventually, if it seemed necessary, move to mandating recycling in those sectors as well. There are a few other strategies, Sarah. I don't know if there were any others that you in particular would want me to touch on, but we do walk through several different specific strategies in the plan document itself.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's a good overview. Just recognizing that the city as a hauler and providing collection to residents, we service about 400,000 households with curbside collection, but that's really a small piece of the pie when you look at the overall waste generation for the Houston area. And the plan really highlights that where the majority of the material being generated, well, I should say like in a normal year, we're seeing a little bit different behavior during COVID times when we have more folks at home more of the time. But generally, that material is coming from businesses and from schools and, retail establishments, offices. So that's an area where, while the city doesn't provide direct service to those, other cities have implemented those ordinances requiring the recycling, and then to support that and to help it be successful, added the staff and capacity to provide technical assistance for implementation and to make it easy to comply with those programs as they're phased into place. So I would mention just that, a big opportunity we have with our single stream program that's also highlighted in the plan, and Mike talked about it in his presentation, is to improve our contamination rate. It's significantly higher than the national average, and so we do have a lot of room for improvement there, and we would just love it if all of our Houston residents that have our city solid waste services remember to put their containers and paper and cardboard in their recycling cart, loose, not bagged, and make sure they're empty, clean, and dry when you do so. And that's plastic bottles, tubs, and jugs, aluminum cans, tin cans, paper, cardboard, and glass bottles and jars. So Just putting that out there in case anyone wanted a refresher on what goes in your recycling cart, because we do have some room for improvement on our own program. As Allison mentioned, the city wants to lead by example and do the best that we can do. Are there any other questions or comments? I'll remind you again to take the survey if you haven't already. Like I said, it takes, SurveyMonkey tells me it's about 10 minutes to complete on average, so not too long. It is detailed. We're looking for feedback on suggestions moving forward, as well as the services we provide now. So I encourage you to do that. Is there anything that I'm maybe forgetting to mention or should mention that the project team would like to comment on?
You know, Sarah, I think we talked about recycling and a lot of it in the traditional sense, but it will be interesting over the next couple of years to watch what happens on the plastics front in Houston. There are talks of some very significant investments being made in the Houston area towards chemical recycling and trying to deal with that plastic waste stream, where Houston could be a national leader on that forefront. So I think that will be real exciting to watch and see how those investments turn into some real progress.
Yeah, that's certainly an emerging area in the recycling world. We have typically thought of recycling as mechanical separation of physical items. And that's certainly what happens with our single stream material now. It goes to the MRF and it's sorted into bottles, cans, paper, cardboard, baled and sold as such. And as Mike mentioned, we're seeing an increased interest in recoverability and recyclability of plastic packaging by producers and manufacturers of that material. And we're seeing some things emerge here locally, both in Houston and in the state, with interest in that plastics recycling, which rather than being traditional mechanical recycling would be what is referred to as chemical recycling, which is either a process that breaks down polymers into monomers or converts them using pyrolysis or some other technology to turn them into either fuel additives or the building blocks for new plastics. So, you know, you might have noticed over the years that the packaging stream, which is basically the recycling stream, has changed a lot. Things that used to be sold in cans or boxes or jars is now sold often in pouches, plastic pouches or lightweight plastic bags. And that material is a little bit difficult to recover in a traditional recycling program in a MRF because of the nature of it. And sometimes it's made up of more than one type of plastic. And because it is lightweight and flexible, it tends to stick to other items and be more difficult to separate in that way. So these programs are looking at providing maybe an alternative for either energy recovery or that breaking down to that plastic in new ways. So that's one of the recommendations in the plan that I mentioned. You know, it is a 20-year plan. And so while we'll be checking in on it, you know, as we go through, we're also putting in there that, recognizing the recommendations made today may expand in the future as different opportunities become available, either through technology or market demand for different materials. So we know that it is a dynamic material stream and it's a dynamic industry. And so you do have to sort of monitor and watch those developments as they come online.
And Sarah, this is Risa Weinberger again. I feel compelled to say that while we're talking about recyclables, we shouldn't forget that, let's say, roughly a third of the waste stream is organics. And the city of Houston is doing a great job of collecting clean organics and in partnership with their private partners, getting that composted and taking that out of the waste stream. And that's yard waste and tree waste, but there are also recommendations in the plan that are geared toward trying to capture more of the organic waste that's being generated in the commercial industrial sector, which is about 2/3 of the waste stream. So what Allison mentioned with regard to green building ordinances having to do with traditional recyclables will also apply to organics, hopefully with the technical support that Sarah talked about. And there are also recommendations in the plan to try to encourage the development of additional composting capacity or processing capacity for organic waste that's closer in, that can handle potentially more than just yard waste.
Yeah, thank you, Risa. I do appreciate you mentioning that. And I think it's really important for those who are interested in the climate waste connection to be reminded of that. The organics diversion, there is a great climate reduction to be had from diverting those organics from landfill disposal to composting or to anaerobic digestion or to some other type of technology. And so as we went through putting together this project, we also did work in partnership, with the Sustainability Office and ARA, with the Climate Action Plan, and with the Resiliency Office in the Mayor's Office with the Resilient Plan, to make sure that the goals that our goals are more specific than theirs and more detailed, but we do tie back to the goals in both of those plans, and everything does work together in support. Some of the recommendations that we have in here around materials management and waste reduction and sustainable materials management are also plans to be a more resilient city and to mitigate our climate impact and reduce our carbon emissions. So those goals all do work together. The solid waste plan does include obviously more in the solid waste world, because it covers also looking at our fleet, our operations, the infrastructure necessary, the funding and resources necessary, as well as the services and goals. But they do tie together with those other two plans. So I did have one other question that came in the chat, so we'll read that out. It says, has our city explored some type of payback for non-contaminated recycling materials, especially paper or metal, providing an incentive to enable the circular economy? And I would say that, yes, as part of our processing contract, those materials do have a value that help cover the cost of that. And we utilize a market index, an industry market index for that pricing. The market has been, Allison touched on this, I may ask her to expound upon it a bit more, has been it's always been dynamic. It's been a bit more volatile than normal, I would say the past couple years. So that incentive from the sale of the material has been not as great as it has been in years past.
Yeah, Sarah, and I'll add to that just to make sure we're covering a potential different angle with the question about a payback for the non-contaminated recyclables. If that's getting at what some states have a bottle bill or a deposit system where an individual can return the materials to get the deposit back. And I think there are 11 different states across the U.S. that have what they call a bottle bill. Texas is not one of them. And one of the challenges to bottle bill states is that, or to implementing a bottle bill, is that all of these systems that have been set up thus far for the processor for the city's materials, and what Sarah was just talking about with the revenue that can be generated from those processing facilities, when you implement a bottle bill, it disrupts that chain, because then individuals are kind of pulling it out of the city's collection system to take it to their processor. So if the question was directly related to individuals being able to take clean recyclables back in some kind of incentive form, like I said, those bottle bill systems are a challenge to implement because of how disruptive it can be to the process that's already in place. But I'll just reiterate what Sarah was mentioning, that the contamination, to reduce contamination is a good thing for everybody, and especially within the city's contract as well. It can allow for more revenue to be had when the markets come back in the recycling world.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for making the point about the deposits, because I wasn't thinking about it in that way. But yes, that's a good point to cover. So appreciate it. We have about 5 minutes left in our meeting time today. I'll remind you again that you can view all of the documents that we've referenced, the facilities analysis, waste generation report, financial assessment, and program assessment, as well as the complete draft of the updated plan. Are all on our website. If you go to houstonsolidwaste.org, the very top of that homepage, there is a link that will take you to the project website. And when you get to the long range plan project website, go to documents, you'll find all that information there. That's also where we're posting the videos of these meetings, as well as on our YouTube channel. You can email us, please do, at longrange@houstontx.gov with any additional comments, thoughts, feedback you want to share, either on the presentation that you've heard today or on the plan documents themselves. If you've not taken our survey already, I'll remind you just one more time before we end to do that. And I will call again. Is there anybody on the phone who hasn't already been able to speak or ask a question that wants to do so before our meeting ends today? Again, a reminder to unmute yourself on the phone, you press *6. Okay. That's great. If anyone has any last questions that you want to put in the chat box, you can do that. Or if you think of something after today's meeting, or when you get a chance to look at the documents, you can send us those questions and comments at longrange@houstontx.gov. And we will be incorporating all of the feedback that we get, both from the survey and through the comments, into the final document. I don't know, Dave, Risa, Mike, Allison, did I miss anything? Is there anything you want to add or share with the group as we're winding up today?
I just want to compliment you on managing the program and getting us to this point. It's been a pleasure working with you. I know we still have a ways to go to get the plan approved. And again, I want to thank those members of the task force that participated today and participated throughout this whole process. And also want to thank our project team members for putting in a lot of effort to get us to this point. Thanks, Sarah.
I appreciate that, Mike. Thank you. And thanks for your great presentation in all these meetings and all your knowledge, and to everybody else on the team. Yeah, it's taken us a couple years, I think, to get here, and we've got a little more to go, but it's been great working with you all. We've had a very knowledgeable team with many years of experience helping us put this together, and I think we've got a good strategy laid out for Houston for the next 20 years. While the adoption of this plan will not be the implementation of any of those strategies, it will just be an adoption of the plan forward. So there will be more work to come. And for those of you who are on the call, who are interested in this area, who are interested in the sustainable materials management for Houston's future, please, you can also, at the end of the survey, you have opportunity to sign up to continue to receive email updates as we move forward, because we will be, as different pieces of the plan, the different recommendations come up for implementation, there will be more work and analysis to detail out exactly how and when those things would be implemented. So, some of the specifics would still need to be decided. So this is a plan to lay out what we need to do, what's recommended that the city do, but the actual action of doing that is yet to come. So stay tuned. It is nearly 4 o'clock, so if there's no other questions or comments, we have just about a minute left, so let me know now. And this presentation and the recordings will be online, so I see. So, all right. Well, we are at the end of our time for today, so I thank you all so much for joining us. And if you have any other further comments, please let us know. I hope you have a good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.